Good afternoon and welcome to the Leadership Learning webinar series. This series provides free learning on relevant business and leadership topics, like today's topic, agility as a mindset. I am Natalie Crotto, Program Manager at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. We at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management are proud to be hosting today's program. Lake Forest Graduate School of Management is an independent, not-for-profit, accredited institution with over 70 years of experience providing practical business education to working professionals. Our business leader faculty who practice what they teach provide graduate business degrees, including the MBA and Master of Science in Management, and targeted training and leadership development through our Corporate Learning Solutions programs. At Lake Forest, we believe that great leaders change lives. We are committed to cultivating leaders through all of our graduate and CLS programs. Effective leaders are agile, self-aware, strategic, innovative, and adept at engaging others. The current leadership webinar series is dedicated to exploring the elements of the Lake Forest leadership model and helping participants develop these skills. We are grateful for the sponsorship and generosity of our client and longtime supporter of the school, Trustmark and the Trustmark Foundation. Trustmark provides access to a full spectrum of flexible benefit solutions, including health plan administration for self-funded employer groups, payroll-deducted voluntary products, group medical benefits, and health and fitness management programs. We are able to bring this webinar to you on a complimentary basis as a result of Trustmark support. I'd like to take a quick moment to go over how we will interact today. During the program, you will be invited to participate using polls, chat, and hand raising. If you have questions or comments during the program, please submit those through the chat feature. If you chat a question or comment, please be sure to use the drop-down box and select all participants before submitting. Please be sure you are muted and that your video is off for the entire program. Now I'd like to introduce Janine Sergey, our facilitator for today's session. Janine teaches strategic thinking at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. Janine is a dynamic executive leader. She is a strategy, organizational development, and human resources professional. She has extensive hands-on management, leadership, strategy execution, consulting, governance, relationship and interface management, performance and process improvement, P&L, cost control, system integration, and growth expertise. Also, for the past 10 years, Janine has been president of the Sergey Group, which is a consulting firm. Janine, we're pleased to have you here today.
Thanks, Natalie. Well, folks, we have just an hour to show just how agile we are, so let's get straight into it. What we really want to achieve today in our time together is to make sure you understand what agility is, to identify what the attributes of an agile leader are, and to apply some thinking processes to ensure agility. Now, there are far more than we're going to address today, but at least it starts to get you on the road to understand what you need to do if you want to be a little more agile, and then to decide on some actions that you could take to increase your agility back in your own world of work. So let's get on. First question has to be, what is this agility thing? So I look and there's so many definitions lying around, one of which says the ability to think and understand quickly. And I go, okay, that's all well and good. It's a nice grounding to have, but if you don't have the ability to be flexible in your thinking, then you're not agile. Another piece found, ability to move quickly and easily, which sounds great, but I'm an old fart, not moving so quickly or easily. But here it's more about the ability to adjust direction and actions. And I think, oh, yay. Even at my age, I can still be agile because it's about that adjustment piece. So what are we looking at specifically? It's real-time adaptation in a dynamic context. And that's what makes it so bloody difficult, folks. Because of that, one, making sure you understand your context. Two, that it's dynamic, which means fundamentally it's changing. You're not going to always have the data all the time, and yet you're still going to have to move and flex within that, which is really difficult. And real-time adaptation means you're going to actually have to make decisions, and sometimes not with, all the data based on assumptions as well. And that makes it a little scary, a little more risky, hence a little harder to be agile. So why do you think the need for agility in leadership today? You'll see on the right-hand side of your screens there is a chat if in the white rectangle at the bottom of it, if you could type in your answer to that one and press send, that would be great. Make sure you're sending to all participants. I'll give you a moment. Yes, Anna, the fact that there's diverse teams you're going to be dealing with. It's supposed to bring up your productivity without a question of a doubt. Yeah, the technology, the pace of information flow, for sure, that industries are changing, that we're changing, that we need to move fast, the massive information again, getting the buy-in, yes, the unknowns that you're speaking about. The fact that your own members are maybe agile, so you've got to keep up with them. Again, coming back to the diversity of different personalities, the environment's changing, demands are changing, situations may be different. Karen, good. So what we're seeing is that the need for agility in leaders is from a macro level and a more strategic level all the way down to situational level, all the way down to ourselves and the individuals with whom we have relationships. Absolutely, as you move into a new role or an organization takes a shift, the expectations may shift, and you don't have control over those expectations. And sometimes you don't even have to go into a new role for that. It can be the fact that your stakeholders change their minds midway. Isn't that joyous? Absolutely, and of course you can have the legal or law changes, those of you who are working globally, and we see the kind of political and economic shifts that are going in terms of the UK, the referendum that's going down in Scotland, in Netherlands, you know, suddenly all those implications can impact if you're doing business on a global scale. What does that imply? So yeah, absolutely, great work, folks. So what now are the attributes then of an agile leader as you would understand it? And I just want to make sure, because then I know how basic to go or how not. Again, if you can stare in chat, open-mindedness, yes, Anna, you've got it. What else? Flexibility, good, use that word. The listening, yes. So decisiveness, yep, that's going to have, and the ability to change those decisions, out-of-the-box thinking, good. Approachable, open to options, resilient, oh, spot on, good words, that you're current on what's happening, and you have a little bit of forecasting around that as well, the adaptable, curious, good, patient, motivated. Yes, if you have no passion, it's going to be very hard to be agile because you're not going to be in there wanting to be. The responding versus reacting, interesting dimensional difference there. The multi-dimensional thinking, love that. The risk-taking, again, you know, I'm into taking risks, but informed risks, and not risks like the trader who brought Barings Bank down with one trade. That's not the kind of stuff we're looking at, but definitely the ability to flex around that. Even killed, yeah, it's kind of sometimes being that calm in the storm that people can come to as a leader when you're being agile, because if you get frenetic, and it's going to be very hard for those around you. Absolutely the confidence, not the overconfidence, I'm pleased to see. Great community, good. Having that 360-degree view, I think, is good too. The ability to multitask, well, that's a whole other conversation, which I don't think I'm going to go into. But I think the fact that you can get different people to do different tasks or change the tasks that they're doing, yeah, if you're challenged, can you outperform? Find a new way of doing it if need be. Authenticity helps. You know, people trust you. It's going to help without a question of a doubt. Connecting people, connecting the dots, good. Wow, folks, you are on a roll here. This is fantastic. You so have it. It's kind of like you know this. It's not rocket science. We fundamentally understand what an agile leader is, but how do we make it a reality? That's what's so difficult. Interesting that you've got that customer centricity. So let's see how it looks. There are actually 6 facets of leadership agility, and you will see, and absolutely that resourcefulness comes in that I'm seeing come up. You're going to see so much of what you've written come into these 6 facets, folk, without a question of a doubt. So we start saying, okay, here's the agility piece. What's it look like? Well, it's got to start with the personal agility, and all these three components are related to you. And it starts with the cognitive agility, which we'll have a look at what that means, but it's obviously your own cognitive agility, your ability for your own brain to think in a certain way. Then it's emotional agility, shocker, sorry gentlemen, and then relational agility as well in terms of the connectivity with people, and we'll look what that means. So you can see some of the verbiage that you spoke about in chat definitely fitting in here. Around that suddenly becomes these other components around leadership agility, of which is situational, organizational, and strategic. So what do each of these mean? We're going to have a look at that in a moment. Cognitive says that we're able to process differing incoming stimuli, that we're able to hold and manipulate information in real time. We can manage the mind within dynamic conditions. We anticipate and we predict based on pattern recognition. I'm big on pattern recognition, folks, because it really helps establish where you need to be. So that just pertains to the cognitive agility. Shocker. All right, it's only one of the pieces. So let's move from that piece and let's look at what emotional agility means. And Natalie's going to bring up the poll for us here. So what I'm wanting you to do, if you can press on polling, and you can make the choices as soon as she gets it started, and you can choose as many as are relevant that would define emotional agility. Give you a moment to finish off. We're certainly not going to give you 5 minutes, so go for it, folks. Let's see if you've got your finger on the pulse on this one. Just want to make sure we've got some foundational knowledge around Agile before we go into the practical.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. The answers should be ready in a few seconds. A couple more seconds.
All right. Now, it's not to say that a whole lot of the stuff that I put in there are not good and needed. However, if we look at it, we so put up the wrong poll. These were cultural hurdles, Natalie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's so the wrong poll. Okay. That's a poll that's coming later down the line, you know. In fact, let me maybe speak to that in terms of cultural hurdles to agility, which goes way beyond our conversation that we're having here, and it's how we're going to round up our session at the end. Because as much as I can teach you agility now, you know, you've got to be able to look at the situation of the world that you live in and work in, and sometimes the culture, the way that you do things around here in your organization either assists you with agility or is working against you. And so shock of shock, when you look at all the options that I gave you in terms of what are the cultural hurdles to agility, and some of you may have been questioning, why did she ask us about emotional agility in this? It shows you none of you were agile enough to actually reach out to us and say, why the bloody hell are you asking us this? It has no relevance. So you just actually lost your first test, folks. No, I'm kidding. All right, so in fact, all these items on here are relevant for cultural hurdles for you to be agile. All right, and that's the sad part. There are just so many pieces that can be in our way to be agile. So now that I've been a Debbie Downer over here, let's go back into emotional agility. I'm not going to put up that poll. Let's rather move on from that. But the emotional agility is about your, indicates that you can be resilient. That's key. So that's one of the words that you folk used. That you display optimism, shocker, all right? That you're able to self-regulate. And that's not whether you had your fiber or not, okay? It's regulate your emotions. That you're able to recover from setback, folks. That's key, too, that you project an energetic air and that you're able to manage your emotions. All right, so those are key components of emotional agility. Let's move to the next one, which is relational agility. Here, let's go and be safe and put it in chat. And what is relational agility about, do you think? What is that pertaining to? Yeah, the empathy, so connecting with everything that goes on the outer thing. I like that. The flexing, how you connect. Yeah, dealing with the different personalities. Connecting the dots will probably come a little later, but connecting the dots in relationships. So the verbal connections, the collaboration, good. Interesting. Flexing to other disc styles. I'm seeing a lot of open communication, collaboration, morphing a little bit. That's not losing yourself, but adjusting, which is good. Treating others with respect, the cooperation, coordination, the authenticity. Nice. So we've got some good stuff there. And you're absolutely spot on, because really, in essence, if I had to summarize what all of you are saying, is that it's the ability to build relationships with a diverse group of people, both within your team, within your organization, and even outside your organization if needed. And so it's an appreciation and ability to operate in different cultures. And so a lot of what you're saying would hold true in that relational agility. So well done. Then we get to situational agility. A little bit different here in that that's where you're able to flex your style to the different stakeholders and the competing demands of any particular situation. And you know how to drive for results in different operational situations, and you may have to adapt the path to get to a goal. So you set a goal, you know, with your strategy or whatever, and your planning, and suddenly you need to adapt the path to get there because a situation arose. Something you maybe couldn't even have predicted could have arisen. And are you able to adjust in the moment? All right, so that would kind of go to situational agility. So let's look at the organizational agility. Natalie, if we can get this poll up, let's make sure it's the organizational agility one up. And let's see how you do on this. We're going to get that poll up in a moment. Yes, we got that one.
All right, the poll has been opened. There we got all kinds of answers flying in. We'll give it a few more seconds. maybe another minute.
Yeah, a whole lot of you haven't even started. If you get those polls going. Remember, we're talking about organizational agility. So some of these items may refer to other types of agility, but it's the organizational piece that I'm looking for. I'm going to give you 15 more seconds, and then we'll close this poll up.
All right, I'm going to close it. We should have the responses in a few seconds.
It just takes a moment to
Analyze everything.
Yep, and get out the results. All right, so you're all going to be able to see what's there. And I'm so thrilled that the majority of you identified that the ability to shift priorities is an organizational agility piece. The fact of integrating new technologies, number C, is definitely there as well. We move down to adapting in real time in a dynamic context is the next one, and that's number G. Doesn't mean to say any of the others aren't relevant, just maybe not in organizational agility per se, or not that they're good qualities to have. And then we go to the very last two pieces, which is about bringing functional information into a coherent process. That's organizational agility, and using complex available information across business disciplines. That, too, is organizational agility. So it's just about being able to know what are the pieces that fit where. And some of you may say, like, who cares? As long as we know all of this is about being agile. Well, yes, that's all well and good, but sometimes you need to say, where am I strong in and where am I not? And you may find within a particular area that's where you need to focus, and hence the need for me to differentiate it out for you. All right, good stuff with the poll. So let's go to what strategic agility is. And this is where you think broadly and strategically across industries and companies, and you consider threats and opportunities. You're open-minded, you embrace change, and you continually anticipate, evaluate, differentiate, innovate, so as to adjust for a competitive future. And that's your strategic agility. So you put all those pieces together and you're near perfect, right? And it's hard to be agile in all these areas, folk, but necessary for agile leadership. All right, so what is not rocket science suddenly gets a lot more dense as we look into it a little bit more. So I wanted to start with the fact of coming down to our cognitive agility and focus often on mental models that affect our agility or can trip us up. And I love this old Indian fable where you have the 6 blind men and what they can feel, so hence they can translate into seeing, becomes their reality, right? It's their schema, their representation of what the world looks like, their worldview. And none of them have the complete picture. And that's problematic in agility. If you have a limited mental model and you're not open to the different perspectives or all the different factors that could be playing out in different ways, it is going to be very hard to be agile, folks. So it starts with making sure that your mental models are not restricting you. It's kind of like if you only watch your news or get your news from certain newspapers or from certain television stations and the ones that only reinforce your own belief system, you could have a problem in being agile, all right? It's about looking at different perspectives all the time. So what's the foundation then to agile leadership? And I thought a great foundation for us to look at would be Lencioni's view on developing and maintaining a high-functioning team, because if you don't have that, it's going to be very hard for you as a leader to be agile. And that high-functioning team consists of these components. So what does it mean? Well, Lencioni speaks to a dysfunctional team where there's the absence of trust, a fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. And I think all of you would agree, problematic in the extreme, never mind for agility, just for good performance and getting results. And really what we're looking from a functional team is building the trust, managing conflict, because conflicts in ideas gives us different perspectives and takes us to that next level. How do we gain commitment, share accountability, and achieve results? We kind of fundamentally know that makes sense. All right, so from an agile point of view, let's look first at the trust piece. And so the question here, why is trust, do you think, so essential to agility? And if you can share that in chat. Let's get a few coming through so we can get a sense of it. Why is trust essential to agility? Yeah, people will follow you moving agilely, and they're going to have to trust you in order to make the change quickly, verifying assumptions, making the right choice of decisions, good, that the team members feel safe, that you have credibility, that there's the confidence. It'll allow you to take more risk if there's trust in every which way, that people aren't second-guessing you, that they know you're reliable, that there's enough trust for people to actually even challenge you. And that people have each other's backs. And you're absolutely spot on, Jessica, with the question, trust yourself or others. I think it's all. I think that's important. And absolutely creating a safe environment and for people to be their true selves, sharing values, everyone on the same page. Because if everyone's on the same page, you'll be able to move and shift. You trust enough to know when to push back at each other. Absolutely spot on, and that transparency, and you need that transparency. If people are not sharing information, you've got a huge problem in being agile, because you may be making moves that are not based on all the information that you need. So you're absolutely spot on in that it creates the confidence for collaboration, Stacy, without a question of a doubt. Yeah, and that you know people. I think I like that, Yoko, where you speak to the trust to know the voice can be heard and it can make a difference. Absolutely. All right, and so when we look at it, it really speaks to absolutely that you're avoiding a zero-sum game. And so what you look at, oh, hi, Sergey. What you look at is the emotional agility and the relational agility comes into this trust piece. Shocker, all right, it all relates to each other. So now let's look at the conflict piece. And when we're looking at the conflict, the question here is, how do you think conflict impacts agility? If we can share that in chat. Yes, if you're avoiding conflict, it's going to be very hard to be agile. It could be the roadblock, reduces productivity. Yes, you become less agile because you're dealing with conflict if it's not of any benefit. And then you're not giving the kind of feedback, receiving or giving. It's the avoiding of communication. If there's blood, it takes away trust. If it's the negative side of conflict, it can impact morale. You can get lack of focus, lack of decision-making, absolutely. The morale goes down, the motivation, yes. You can stall progress, hard to move forward if you're moving in different directions. And then, Trinell, you got it. When used effectively, it can be great for kinetic energy. Absolutely. So the unresolved negative conflict can slow you down, but the positive and the mismanaged conflict can erode your trust, absolutely. But the constructive conflict can broaden the mind and make you more agile. So it's on both sides of the fence, folks. So if you're one of those people who avoids conflict, beware, because it doesn't necessarily help with the agility then. All right, so if you're embracing conflict in perspectives, in ideas, in concepts, it can help you to be far more agile. All right, the conflict that actually is going to tear down the trust and be very hard to be agile is if it becomes emotional, oh shocker, and it affects relationships. So we've got the cognitive agility, the emotional and relational piece. So conflict within the cognitive agility is fantastic. Cognitive that's negative in the emotional and relational piece of agility is obviously going to affect you negatively. So now we're going to look at the top piece of Lencioni's functionings of a team of commitment, accountability, and results. And that refers to our ability to look and create a strategy, folks. And so what does creating that strategy mean? All right, and I've taken this from Senji, and he basically says from the fifth discipline, we need to have a vision of where we want to be kind of when we grow up. We need to have a sense of that. If we look at Lafley and Martin's work in Playing to Win, it's kind of what's your winning aspiration? All right, so it's all very well we have that vision, but we also have to figure out where are we now? What is our current reality? And then Senji says it's like pulling a piece of elastic between the two. What do you get when you pull that piece of elastic? If any of you remember your basic physics from school, you get tension, and he calls it creative or dynamic tension. Now, ow, you don't want to let go of that elastic all of a sudden, that rubber band. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what name we call it, yeah? All right, because not only going to be let go of your vision, but it's going to be bloody sore. So you want to be able to keep that dynamic tension going. Can you see where conflict can be good? But you've got to figure out, and he makes it rather simplistically, set objectives and take action to move from your current reality to your vision, which is all well and good. But we can create a vision for an environment that suddenly changes on us. And that may mean we may need to move things. Our current reality may change, which means that the objective and the action plan we set may need to adjust as well. All right, and so we need to understand that even within this, it's within an environment and may change. Your vision may change because you may get new leadership in your organization, and we know vision is leader-led, very hard to champion someone else's vision. So someone else comes in, has a different vision, and you suddenly got to kind of tweak to what the new person requires. So then we also have to look at another concept of strategic alignment. All right, and this is a model I use a lot in strategic planning because it really does underpin the agility. I always look at strategy kind of like a piece of machinery, which I know is a little bit of an odd analogy. But with any piece of machinery, it's made up of different widgets. And as each widget moves, so the widget right next to it needs to move as well. Again, going back to our physics. So the first widget we need to consider, of course, is the environment. And very much to what you've spoken to earlier, what's happening in the macro environment, in the marketplace environment, that's flexing out and that we may need to adapt to. And then we need to be able to put our strategy in line with where that environment is going. And it's all well and good with the environment that, took decades to make shifts and changes, and we know there's rapid movement in change now. And so our strategies sometimes need to even be ahead of the curve in terms of proactively predicting where that environment may be going to. So we put that strategy into, and we kind of form that strategy, and that's all well and good. But now we have to do a little bit of a reality check and say, do we have the resources that we need to put that strategy into place? And if not, do we need to, do a step approach to the strategy and have a phase 1, a phase 2, and so on? Or do we need to say that's a great idea, but the time has not yet come? Or is it we believe the strategy is absolutely essential for our organization, and hence we better find those resources? And so it will, in fact, inform some of the actions we take. But believe it or not, folks, the other widget we have to consider is the culture, the way we do things around here. And if our strategy does not go and inform our culture and our culture doesn't shift, our strategy is not worth the paper that it's written on. All right, so how do we take that strategy and make it happen? And I was talking to an organization earlier this week, and I had to bite my tongue until the moment was opportune. But, you know, they're going to have a rollout of a new strategy that's going to take 5 years. In an industry that I know they're in, that are you flipping kidding me? They don't have 5 years to roll it out where then everyone will have and be acting in a way, in the culture, the way that they should be. You know, their time will have come and gone, and their competitors will be way ahead of them by then, and they needed to be on a different strategy in 5 years' time. So hello, and probably even before 5 years. So we don't have that luxury anymore. So how do you roll out in an organization in a much quicker way to get people to move becomes an essential. And a big part of that is the last piece, but by no means the least, and that's the leadership. Leadership at every level in an organization that needs to be married to that strategy. You know, it's kind of like looking at a strategy and the leadership are still having performance agreements with their people that have nothing to do with the new strategy. They are measuring and rewarding stuff that has nothing to do with the strategy. They are telling stories and using symbols and rituals that have nothing to do with the strategy. Well, you know what people are going to listen to. It's their leadership, not the bloody strategy. So you really have to be careful with that, and that strategic alignment becomes crucial. Now, if we look at it and we get to the verbiage of strategy, we know strategic planning is on one half of that space. And, you know, really with the right tools, we can put the plans into play. Oftentimes the implementation is where it fails, and we see that from some of the stats, you know, that we get from where organizational reengineering or strategic implementation fails, and the kind of percentage of where it fails, and 60% of strategic plans are not even realized. All right, and so I think a large problem is because people forget that there's strategic thinking that needs to happen across the spectrum, which then allows for that strategic agility to occur. All right, and so it all comes back to that strategic agility, folks. And then we say, okay, so what is key? Well, we need to recognize failure fast. You can have all those pieces in play for strategic alignment, but if you're not recognizing that you're failing, problem, and then we need to change fast, and we need to test a new way of doing things fast, and we need to adjust fast. That's what's key, and we've forgotten how to do that. Now, obviously, depending on the size of your organization, it may be easier to do that. If you're a startup, you're entrepreneurial, still small, the founders of the organization are still in the mix, it's a really dynamic, robust team, you'll be able to flex very, very fast. But as your organization grows, it becomes a lot harder. And if we look at some of the Fortune 500s, it's a whole different ballgame to be agile in a more corporate environment. All right. So key is that we anticipate, folks. And so part of that is you can have the best idea to put out your lemonade stand, but if someone else comes into the mix, you may have to change out your strategy. And that's what's key. So from a competitive dynamics point of view, as we implement our strategy, our competition is going to be implementing their strategy and reacting to ours, which means strategy is not a zero-sum game, right? You will need to find areas to compete where you can win. You need to think about how the competition could play out, and you need to think how other companies' strategies are going to interact with ours and how we may need to adjust them as we move along. So key becomes the adaptability, folks. And so we need to suddenly explore possibilities. So what might a better answer look like? And so in this regard, I wanted to bring in a technique or tool for us to be able to use to be able to do that. Oftentimes, if there's conflict in an organization, it's because two different functional areas or two different people have a different model of how they want to see either a problem addressed or a challenge explored or something instituted or put into the organization. All right, so then this is a great tool to use to be a little more agile with that. So it's when you have two distinct opposing models. So the example I'm going to use is from Isidore Sharp, where he was looking, and this was some time ago when we didn't have the kind of options of hotel groups that we do today, and there was the small motel and there was the large convention center hotels. Now, key here is you look and you say, what is great about the small motel? And for him, it was about the warmth and the intimacy. But we know that not everything has everything that's great about it, so what's the negative on it? Well, there's less than 200 rooms, which obviously diminishes your ability to make money in it, and there's few amenities for people, and he didn't like that. But when he looked at the large convention center hotels, he said, okay, what's good there? And there's over 700 rooms with lots of amenities. The downside of that is, of course, is there's no intimacy and no warmth. And so the trick is, how do we then adopt the positives of both models and eliminate or minimize the negatives? All right, and they were able to do that. And he came up with his option, which was for the Four Seasons Hotel, which was a medium-sized luxury hotel redefined by service and funded by a massive price premium. And that opened up a whole new type of hotel that never existed before. All right? So let's look at this kind of thinking in a different way. So this was a challenge. The guy by the name of Dietz worked for GE, and when he was out in the hospitals, he designed the MRI machine, right? And we know the MRI machine, and if you've been in it, is a scary place to go into. And he was really upset to see how many kids were going into the MRI machine, and what they were having to do was sedate the children, where if a child is that ill to have to go in for an MRI, you don't really want to mask some of the symptoms, right? So you really don't want to be giving them any medication if at all possible. But they were not able to get them into the machines without sedation. And that was not a good plan. So he looked at it, and this is a two-model process, looking at it in a slightly different way. So he said, okay, what is it about the MRI? It is noisy. It is scary. There's an unknown about it. You know, when you're going in, you don't know what's going to happen when you're in there if you've never been in before, and it's uncomfortable. All right? Those are yucky things. So the way that he looked at it, he said, okay, what is it about children? And so we've got the MRI machine as one model, and let's take the kids as the other model, which is an interesting way of doing this, and saying, how do they react to these MRI characteristics? Well, kids like noisy if they are making the noise or it's part of a movie or play acting. They like scary if it's part of an adventure, and they love the unknown if that means novelty connected to an exciting theme. And we know because Disney kind of made a huge thing out of that one. And then we know uncomfortable if it's part of the adventure, and then they might be rewarded for bravery. All right. Now, he wasn't given the wherewithal to design a whole new MRI machine. He had to come up with something that was different, and this is what they came up with in the hospital that he went into. And folks, no child needed to be sedated thereafter. They created the story for the child. They actually put them in garb that was pirate garb. They created the story. The nurses were dressed up as well, who put them in, and the physician's assistants went into the MRI. They came out, and they were rewarded for their bravery and no sedation. Shocker. Different way of looking. That's what we mean by agility, folks. All right, so this is what's known as the integrative thinking process. And there are tips for this. You need to fall in love with each model. So I don't care if some people absolutely love one thing as opposed to another. When you work on the one model, you have to fall in love with it. absolutely key. Everyone has to. And we have to resist the urge to solve the problem right away. And when you've got the two models, what you need to look at, what are the similarities between the models and where they're points of tension? And then you've got to explore the possibilities. It kind of put another way, for those of you who know Covey on a more kind of personal level, he speaks to one of his habits where it's not my way, it's not your way, it's our way, a better way. Kind of integrative thinking is that on a more cognitive level, all right, with problems or issues or even opportunities that we may find. And in fact, there's an interesting, another way of looking at this integrative thinking. Actually, funny enough, the example that's coming to mind is GE once again. But this is with their EKG machines, and this term is being called reverse engineering. Not reverse engineering, oh shoot, wait. What is it? Oh, bugger. I can't think of the actual name of it, but it's really interesting, whereby, EKG machines, are huge. They cost an absolute fortune, and they sit in the hospitals. And they had kind of tapped out the market in America. Every hospital has an EKG machine, right? And so they were looking globally and putting it around the world. And obviously in developing countries, there's a huge market. Populations are growing. They also have heart problems. They also need to have EKGs. The problem when they looked, say, at India, was that there are few hospitals, even though there's huge population. They can't afford these huge machines, and people still need EKGs, but they need it where they're having their heart problems. So they said, okay, these are those concepts, but now it's in a different environment. What are the factors in that environment? And they realized that healthcare went to the people. So the healthcare provider would have to walk, which means the EKG machine had to be small. There is not necessarily electricity in most parts of the country, which means it would have to be not electricity powered. And so what they also reverse innovation. Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate that. I knew it. The engineering was wrong. It was reverse innovation. Thank you. And so what they did, and they knew it had to be cheaper, so it had to be a unit that would cost $5,000 or less. And they actually did come up with a design. And suddenly they had a huge market in India and other developing countries, and shock of shocks, they suddenly found there was a new market for it here in the States. Why? We don't only need the machine when we get to the hospital. Sometimes we need it on site, and if it's a small machine, it could be run in every ambulance in America. Suddenly there's a huge market. Really interesting. So again, the ability to be agile, think differently around things. All right, so that's another way of looking at it. Let's now look when you hit with a business challenge. Remember, a challenge could be a problem, but a challenge could be there's an opportunity, but we're not quite sure how we want to kind of grasp that opportunity. And so this is another technique that I wanted to share with you, and this is more situational agility based, but there are definite different steps to it. The first one is, what role do you need to play in this challenge? You need to be able to figure that piece out. Once that's figured out, you need to form fast. And what do we mean by forming fast is you need to form a team, and it may not be just your team. It's about looking at your resourcing across your organization of who would be touch points for this particular issue, who would have perspectives, knowledge, expertise that could come in and make a difference. And so you form fast teams. And then you make the challenge very visible. So you define the problem, you define the opportunity for people. So we know what we're actually going to be addressing. The next piece that you want to then look at is to get a shared understanding of what that challenge is. And you can see why you're going to need those different perspectives. And interestingly enough, I've seen, of late, some organizations even bringing some of their customers or consumers into the mix as well. And then you assign the issues an owner, and you need to be able to have resolution or recommendation dates. So in other words, when you look at what it is about the challenge and you're going to say, how are we going to, who needs to be addressing which pieces, you actually determine all the pieces that are in it and who needs to own it, and by when they need to come up with a recommendation or a resolution. So there are milestones in that. And then you close the issue out quickly to solve the problem with speed. So it's kind of breaking it down into itty-bitty pieces. Everyone gets a piece, and you solve it. All right, so this is a great sort of process to have quick turnaround on stuff when it doesn't have to be large, kind of like a mini project, like little mini projects. All right, now I have to speak to, because some of you may have been exposed to the Agile process. And the Agile process was, in fact, where you have Scrum Masters and stuff like that. And you notice I haven't addressed it in this program because that was specifically developed for software design, with the whole idea being that oftentimes when software has to be designed, you have this long, you've given the requirements from your customer, and then IT goes away and is sequestered and designs the software over months and months and months, and by the time it goes out live, it's not what the customer actually wants, or things have changed by the time the design comes out and it's not quite as usable in the new environment, and there was a realization there was a problem. So the Agile process came into play so that, yes, you have a plan for the software, but you make sure you're flexing it all the way through to customer needs, so you're not too long down the line with needing to change, which is great for software design. My difficulty with the Agile process is I'm starting to see in organizations where they're applying it to other things and making it an excuse for not doing any strategic planning or business planning, and instead they're going to be Agile all the time. Well, you can fly by the seat of your pants for some of the time, but it's going to trip you up, folks. So I'm not adverse to being Agile and using the Agile process, but within a plan, because you've got to have a sense of where you're going to or what it is you want to be achieving. And I'm seeing that it's tripping people up. The other problem that I'm seeing is when you apply the Agile process to everything. You've got to be careful about the kinds of people who you bring on board. The Agile process breaks things down into little pieces, and the way that it's sometimes played out is that people on a daily basis are given different tasks to do that they have to complete by the end of the day, pull together new tasks the next day, and people don't own something from beginning to end. And personality-wise, some people find that extremely difficult. They want to own things. They want to be able to affect it from beginning to end, and then that process won't allow it. So again, not a bad process at all, but it's got to be situationally appropriate. I think that's what's important and you need to consider. So that leaves us with the thought of what's needed for agility, and I love these three components: openness, focus, and flexibility. If we really want to bring down what suddenly we saw was quite a robust subject into three key elements. So this is where you get working again, folks. In chat, I want you to give some serious thought, given the whole discussion we've had around agility, how you are going to ensure these three back at work in light of everything that we've discussed. Give it some thought and maybe share, because it may give other people some ideas in chat. Let's make it real. Let's make this hour count. Good, the listening before reacting, and knowing who to listen to. Coming up with a game plan, yes, and then adjusting it as and when needed. Driving the flexibility, considering all aspects, yes. Seek more inputs, and make sure you're getting kind of the devil's advocate, people who think about things differently from you. Sometimes getting consensus can take too long from an Agile perspective, so be aware of that one, knowing which things need consensus and which don't. Yes, don't only own your own way, absolutely. There is different from an Agile mindset to Agile delivery. Good. And understanding that difference. That you actually entertain all ideas. Okay. Scott, your post-it note makes me giggle, I have to tell you. Yes, that you have to start with common goals and they are understood by the team because that's going to allow you to be agile amongst things. And then if you break down the goals into itty-bitty tasks, you can be agile with the pathway and those tasks if need be. Yes, you've got to be able to make people aware, and people need to be trained and able and have mastery over what it is that they do in order for them to be agile. If you have people who are not able or enabled, very hard for them to be agile. Yes, they need to understand your mission statement. They need to understand what does success mean. Michelle, I love the fact that you speak to learning from misses because sometimes learning from where we fail is as important as learning from where we succeed because that enables us to be agile as well. So, you know, there's a wonderful article. I know it's an older article. I think it was written in 2002. Called The Failure Tolerant Leader. I still love the concepts in it. You know, are you tolerant of failure? Now, I'm not talking about failure where someone messed up and there was learning to it and then they messed up doing the exact same thing. That's a performance issue, way different. But failure tolerant is about being able to flex around the misses, so I love that. Yeah. Dhirav, you've got it in terms of the openness, getting input, and making the timely decisions. And you've got to understand, for there to be flexibility, there has to be an anchor in the storm, right? So there has to be someone, you, the Agile leader, who's able to kind of be the conductor of the orchestra, so to speak, knowing who to come in when, what shifting where, and having a handle on it becomes so essential. Good stuff. So we spoke to the cultural hurdles earlier on, and don't forget that in your context, really important. So some questions to kind of leave you with and to ponder. How would you like to seek out new information? Because that's important. What or who else may provide data, ideas, and new perspectives? Ask yourself, how would someone in, say, marketing look at this task and think about it, or in finance? This may change the way the task is approached. How would our consumer actually react to it? What should you be paying attention to in order to notice new changes? And what process do you need to put into place to make sure your actions remain agile? These are key questions if you want to remain agile moving forward. So in that agility, folks, I wish you the best of luck in being resilient as you move forward. I will remain behind for any questions that haven't come up as yet, and I will hand it over to Natalie as we say once again a thank you to our sponsors.
Thank you, Janine. That was a great session, and thank you for being agile with the polls. We hope you've taken actionable information from this session. Today's program was part of the Leadership Learning Webinar series delivered by Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. This program was made possible by our sponsor, the Trustmark Foundation. Again, our deepest thanks for their support. We value your feedback. In the chat box is a link to an evaluation. Please take the time to complete it. We use the information from these surveys to continually improve our sessions. Lake Forest Graduate School of Management builds better business leaders through our graduate degree programs and corporate learning solutions. If you're interested in developing your leadership skills and business acumen through an MBA or Master of Science in Management degree, or you want to bring a corporate learning solutions program to your organization, please visit lfgsm.edu. We will be offering offering some future webinars. Please look in your email for registration links to these sessions, or you can visit our website for the calendar. With that, we'd like to end the session and wish you a productive rest of your day. If anyone wants to stay on the line for additional questions, Janine will be happy to answer. Please chat the questions in if you have any. The slides will be sent out in the email along with the recording.